am a storyteller, and that means that I make stuff up and put it out there in the world, which may not sound like the profession that has weighty ethical issues that keep you awake at night. In particular, I am a transmedia storyteller, and what that means is that one of my favorite things in the world to do is take fragments of my story and make them real and put them out there in the real world. So if my story has a letter, then I would write the letter and give that to the audience instead of telling them about it. If there is a statue with supernatural powers, I might make the hand of that statue and send it to everybody. Now, it turns out there's already a word for making something up and putting it in the world as if it were real, and it's not transmedia storytelling. See also lies, deception, falsehood. Now, I'm not trying to fool anybody when I put my work out there in the world. I have good intention, but to the person who finds my stuff out of context and has no way to know that it's part of a story, it may as well be a hoax. Let me give you an example. Some years ago, I worked on a game called Perplexity, which was a 2-year treasure hunt. And for those 2 years, we created the digital footprint of a place called Perplexity. It had a newspaper that published 3 times a week, every week. It had characters who had blogs, who had email addresses, and if you sent them email, they would email you back. And of course, we had companies with their own websites. This is for Cognivia, which was a pharmaceutical company in Perplexity, and they made smart drugs like Serotin. I know I would personally love to have a pill that made me a little smarter. Of course, completely fictional. And one day, my colleague Adrian Hahn was invited to speak at Google. And we thought, it would be really fun if we got custom M&Ms, the little chocolate candy, and had Serotin printed on them to give away at this talk. So I went online and I ordered the M&Ms, and a couple of days later, Mars M&M called me. They had a policy, a very strict policy, of not printing drug names on M&Ms. Well, in this particular case, I explained to her that it was a completely fictional drug company and a completely fictional drug, and they decided to allow this through. So we did get our M&Ms, and no harm was done in the end. But actually, if we change the parameters of that experiment just a little bit, we could have had a really different consequence. Let's say that instead of making smart drugs, this was a pharmaceutical company working on stem cell treatments for Parkinson's disease, just by way of example. And in our filler press releases, we had said we are 3 to 5 years away from an amazing, innovative treatment for Parkinson's disease. And what if that site and that press release were indexed by Google, as the Cognivia site was? And what if a person who really had Parkinson's disease found that site and had no way to know that it was fictional? And what if that person made a treatment decision based on essentially the lies that I had told? This would be an ugly, horrible consequence. Now, there's a really thin line that separates fiction and reality. And, me and transmedia storytellers like me come along with our innovative narrative vehicles and our immersive experiences, and we kind of make the world harder to live in for everybody. It's not what we're trying to do, but it's definitely the result. And there have been actual real consequences. So I stand here today having been condemned by NASA. I mean, the NASA that sends rockets into outer space. This particular project was a marketing campaign for the film 2012. You may remember the Roland Emmerich disaster movie, The End of the World, which fortunately did not actually happen. As a part of this experience, we made a website for the Institute for Human Continuity. And from the movie, these were the people that were stealing fabulous masterworks of art and crafting escape arcs so that the very rich and the very powerful could survive the end of the world. And NASA was getting phone calls from people who thought that it was real. This was too realistic, and people were really, truly frightened. Now, in our defense, the website said on the bottom, Sony Pictures, Columbia Entertainment, in theaters November 13. And I think really the only thing that would have made NASA happy would have been to make the film about something else entirely. Pardon me. But actually, this idea of sorting what's real and what's not online is complicated even to begin with, even before we go into transmedia storytelling. So I can't take all of the blame here. Snopes is a website designed solely to help people figure out what's real and what's just a story online. But we transmedia storytellers do something a little more complicated than that, a little harder. Sometimes we take these things and take them out of the digital world and into the physical. One of the most common things that I see a beginning student designer do, and I've seen it more times than I could count, is to make a project where the plot is about a missing person, usually a missing girl. And they think a great way to start this project is to print out flyers for this missing girl. Have you seen me? Please call, please visit this website to find out more. And the problem is when you're designing something like that, you're thinking in the context of a game, you're thinking in the context of a story. But when someone is walking down the street and they see, have you seen me? What they think is, oh, that's really terrible. I hope they find that girl, and when I get home, I am going to lock my door. There have actually been more serious consequences, too, less theoretical consequences. Zona Incerta was a Brazilian ARG, an alternate reality game that took place some years ago. And there was a fictional company, as one does, for a company that wanted to cut down a huge part of the Amazonian rainforest, which is a very tense political issue in Brazil. And word got to a Brazilian senator about this company that wanted to cut down the rainforest. And he gave a speech denouncing that company on the Senate floor in Brazil. The problem being the company never existed. The designers spent a night worried that they were going to go to jail for fraud. Fortunately, in this case, the senator had a really good sense of humor, and he even proposed a national alternate reality game day in celebration of this new art, which was wonderful. A colleague of mine, Brian Clark, actually produced a documentary about the assassination of Bill Gates some years ago. This is obviously something that didn't ever actually happen either. And when he launched his project, it crashed the Korean stock market, and he was visited by the FBI. So when I'm designing a transmedia narrative, the thing that I worry about is how realistic is the thing that I'm making, and based on that, what is the risk of harm? What is the consequence if somebody does believe that it's real? So if I make a website for a restaurant that does not really exist, the worst thing that will happen is that somebody will make a plan to go to that restaurant. They will go there, it will not be there, and they will have dinner somewhere else that night. This is not a terrible consequence. On the other hand, for many years, I have wanted to kidnap somebody as a part of a game. I think it would be tremendous fun. It would be an incredible experience. But I can't find a way. I can't find a way to do it in an ethical and responsible fashion. Obviously, the victim would have to be in on it. And then beyond that, you would have to make sure that any bystander who might happen to see it would know what was going on, or else you would get a call from the police. However, I've come to realize over the last few years, as I've learned more and more about the brain, about how we process narrative, how we deal with new information, how we deal with stories, that the problems of transmedia are really just the tip of the iceberg. And there are deep ethical responsibilities for any storyteller. The problem is that we're looking into the mirror of story, but the mirror is also looking back at us. We're shaping the story, and we are also being shaped by the story at the same time, even when we think we're not. There was a study out of the London School of Economics and Political Science a few years ago, and it was measuring how your opinions change based on the information that you receive. They sent out extremely biased political newsletters to people who disagreed with that political stance. And they thought they would measure whether someone's opinion changed based on reading those newsletters. And they didn't at first. 6 months after they stopped sending the newsletters, without exception, the opinions of the people who had received this propaganda had been changed. In some cases, it had been an extreme change. 6 months later. The theory is that once something is in your brain, the source of it is gradually lost over time. So what started out as something that you knew but you didn't believe eventually just became something that you knew. Stories are the things that we tell ourselves are true as a society. Some of those stories are fantastic. Some of them are things like love conquers all. There's always a way. Some of them are, unfortunately, less good stories, like men are really bad with babies and girls are bad at math. But story is the way that we come to a consensus reality. And unfortunately, the stories that we tell can have unfortunate and horrible consequences on real people. Brigham Young University has done a study showing that girls who read fitness magazines, high school girls, are very, very much more likely to suffer from an eating disorder. There's also a thing called stereotype threat, where if you remind someone of a stereotype about them, their behavior changes to conform to that stereotype, even if they don't want to. So if you ask a girl if she's a girl or a boy by having her check a box before she takes a math test, she will perform worse on that math test than if you had not asked her. Now, the power of story is not entirely negative. There are good uses as well. We have a thing called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are the thing that allow us to learn something by watching someone else do it. When we observe something, we feel like it's happened to us. When we read a story, we are in the story, and the story really is happening to us. And over time, this has changed amazing public perception about things like gay rights, for example. When I was 8 years old, I remember reading a newspaper article about the AIDS epidemic. And I remember having the feeling that, well, gay people were, not really real people. Now, some years later, obviously I know very much better, but that's because of the power of story. Buffy the Vampire Slayer had a lesbian romance, and people experienced that romance, and it became human, it became normal. We had Ellen DeGeneres come out, in the United States on national television. We had Will and Grace. These stories that we were told shaped our perception in a new way and actually changed the world. We are made of stories. Story is the lens through which we see the entire world. And so it behooves us as storytellers to make sure that the stories we're telling actually shape a world we want to be living in, a world where gay people are human and have rights and should have families, a world where Muslims are not all terrorists, a world where girls are mathematicians and scientists and not just mothers and nurses. At the end of the day, every story we tell is true. Thank you.